And ladies and gentlemen, this is Loki, the blogger for HumaneExposures.com, and today we have the pleasure of bringing you a wide array of people that are getting a lot of very useful things done across the 50 states. Today we're going to bring you four faces from the National Juvenile Justice Network. Abby Anderson, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance. She also served as the co-chair of the Executive Committee for the National Juvenile Justice Network since '07 and was formerly on the Executive Board of the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. Abby, say hello to the viewers.
Hello, viewers.
Then we've got Jim Moser, Deputy Director of the Wisconsin Council of Children and Families, multi-issue state advocacy organization promoting health, safety, economic ability for Wisconsin's children and families. He's also currently a member of the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice for OJJDP and co-chairs the Executive Committee of the National Juvenile Justice Network. Go ahead and say hi, Jim.
Welcome, everyone.
Then we have Sarah Breyer, the director of the NJJN. She's been working in criminal and juvenile justice fields for over 2 decades now. Prior to this organization, she was the director of policy and planning at the Center for Alternative Sentencing and Employment Services. This was an alternative to incarceration program that served over 10,000 misdemeanor and felony level court-involved youth and adults every year. And last, my periodic collaborator on the NJJN end of things is Benjamin Chambers, who has been writing professionally for over 20 years, and half of that has been in the field of juvenile justice. From 2000 to '07, he worked at the Multnomah County Department of Community Justice in Portland and was involved in improving youth drug treatment. Also served on their management team. From 2008 to '11, he launched and edited the Reclaiming Futures blog, which I'm sure a lot of our readers are well aware of. It was actually how I found him. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the substance of today about the report and its findings, why don't we lead off, Sarah, if you'd be kind enough, explain to our viewers a little bit what the Juvenile Justice Network is, what you guys do, and how you got started off.
Sure. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for watching us. So the National Juvenile Justice Network is a membership organization of state-based advocacy groups and organizations that are all seeking the fair treatment of youth in conflict or youth in trouble with the law in their jurisdictions. We have 43 members in 33 states, and our goal as a national membership organization is really to help promote reform and fair treatment of youth in trouble with the law on the state level, and to elevate our collective voices for national gain on the federal level. So that's just a little bit. We've been around since 2005.
And since 2005, you guys have been instrumental in gathering together a lot of useful data. You've put out several reports so far, if I'm not mistaken, this just being the latest one. Is that correct?
That's correct. So every year we try to, so this Advances in Juvenile Justice Reform document that we're talking about today is the fourth in a series, the third time that we've published it formally, and it's also the biggest and most comprehensive of our set of advances publications.
Outstanding. So, out of curiosity, and we'll let you guys decide who will take the lead on this one, in compiling your report, what sort of methodology did you use? How was the data collected? How did you verify the authenticity of the data?
Mm-hmm. So let me speak to this briefly, and then other folks can chime in, because I know that Abby and Jim both participated in this process. It's a multi-tiered process, and we first look through this national database that's put together by the National Conference of State Legislatures, and they gather all kinds of juvenile justice legislation that's come down the pike. Some of it good, some of it bad. We gather it all together and analyze it. We reach out to all of our members and say, hey, what's happened in your states? Anything good? What can we talk about? Whether it's court reform, administrative reform, or legislative reform. And then we reach out to all of our partners and allies in the field and ask them the same question. And then we end up with a massive amount of data that we cull through, and we try to identify what looks like it really has had a positive impact for young people in that jurisdiction. And then we go back to that jurisdiction and we say, hey, this looked like it was a good thing. Was it? And we vet it and make sure that everything that's in this document actually had a positive outcome for youth in that state. And so I mentioned Abby and Jim because they were part of that process, and we reached out to them on numerous occasions and said, hey, here's a piece of legislation, looked good. What do you think? Was it a good piece of legislation? Did it have a positive impact?
Outstanding. So Jim, since you were involved in that process from a slightly different perspective, why don't you give us your take on it?
Well, I think Sarah's right that it was really helpful to come back to the state, folks in the state who can really speak to, what looks on paper may or may not in the end be something we would consider a positive reform. So it's really helpful to have our membership be involved in this process. I think the other thing that's for our members and having been involved is trying to capture some of the changes that happen that are hard to capture in bullet points or short summaries. As we know, there's a lot of work that goes on day in, day out by advocates that can't always be captured in a soundbite or a bullet point. So it's a good process, and I'm very pleased with the way the staff has the folks have put together the report to really capture some key things. And we'll just say it's in many ways it's highlights. It's certainly not all that advocates are doing around the country.
Outstanding. So out of curiosity, just as a broad question, how are we doing on the national level? Are things improving overall as far as a move towards more effective and cost-effective rehabilitation programs as opposed to the incarceration that has been the norm up until now?
I think that one of the things that Advances points out is just how far we're coming and just how far we have come. The fact that you look through and it's 3 years of legislation, and yeah, we're covering all 3 states, but when you think about the fact that juvenile justice isn't necessarily something that is top of mind for everybody, it's not necessarily it's not job creating. It's not something that every candidate is talking about or that is part of an election cycle. So the fact that we have this incredibly thick booklet of juvenile justice related legislation that happened over a 3-year period, I think is incredibly impressive, and it speaks to the fact that things are really moving forward. A few specific examples as you look at the section in the book on de-incarceration, moving kids out of facilities and back to their communities. You look at the number of juvenile facilities, prisons, detention centers that have closed, places where for a long time we were sending kids out of their homes, out of their communities, and locking them up. And what we've really learned over the past 10, 15 years is how ineffective that was, not just when you look at the outcomes for the kids, but when you look at the outcomes on public safety and you look at the outcomes on community budgets, that it's not effective, nor is it cost effective. So that's been one huge piece, and another piece that you look at is this whole issue of what's deemed the school to prison pipeline. And when you take a look at that, the different efforts that have happened around the country, and for us, I find this incredibly helpful to look at what other people have done, because education is so unique and so local that different things are going to have to be tried, and what happens in one jurisdiction, the exact same thing isn't going to work someplace else. So looking at all these different things that have happened really allows different states and different jurisdictions and different advocates a menu to look at instead of saying there's a one-size-fits-all kind of a piece. And I think the third area that really jumps out is the work that's been done around removing youth from the adult system. So there's been different states, plug to Connecticut, that raised the age of jurisdiction to get 16 and 17-year-olds out of the system. But there's been other states that have done things like that. Illinois, Massachusetts is working on it. Mississippi removed some misdemeanors from the adult system. But a lot of work to really minimize the ease at which young people are put in the adult system, but also the amount of young people that go into the adult system. So all 3 of those areas have really rich sources of information and breadth of details about different pieces of legislation, but also non-legislative changes that have happened.
Well, I must say on a personal note, I'm glad to see some of the positive change in Mississippi. I live in New Orleans. They're our next door neighbors.
Yeah.
And Loki, let me just jump in with that a little bit on following up what Abby said is the tremendous gains that have been made in sort of, in many ways, have helped us as well. And the document alludes to sort of, this is not just the work of, you know, advocacy groups, but really a lot of folks working together in communities and states, using research, bringing together information on cost benefit, the kinds of things that I think if you ask advocates, you could say, you know, we've been really talking about these things for a long, long time, and seeing some payoff now in some areas that I think are real positive. So, well, it's continued good work.
Do you think that? Do you think that we are building up enough momentum for this perspective on the issue through the work of advocacy groups like your own, that we have hope of seeing a sea change across the board with the system? How likely do you think that might be? Yeah. How much momentum do you think we're gaining?
Wow, there's a really good question. Let me
and I realize it's one that may not have an answer.
Yeah. So, I think there's clearly momentum. You know, Abby alludes to seeing the successes in other states can really both energize us as advocates and give examples of how things can be done, and seeing some positive results. I think we, you know, have a ways to go in terms of really having the outreach and the public understanding of the kinds of things that have happened that have really made a change. I think you alluded to it, or maybe Abby did, but you know, what gets attention in the public is the bad story, and so I don't know that we're as able and been as effective as we hope to be in telling the good story. So I think there's momentum. There's a lot to build on. There's a lot of good practices and data to build on. There's still a lot of work to do, and I think we have to be ever vigilant that we don't get complacent or slip back.
Indeed.
I'd like to just add in a couple points there. I do think that one of the things that we're seeing now is that juvenile justice reform, treating kids fairly, is not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. And what we're seeing in a lot of the legislation is that there was deep and broad support across the aisle from both parties to recognize that if we want public safety and we want to do right by our communities and we don't want to destroy our state budgets, we have to look at these issues in a different way. And I think that that's one of the things that gives me a great deal of hope, is that it's being seen much more broadly, and you see this across the states. When you look at the reforms. And the other thing I think that bodes well for the future is that we're seeing an elevation of other kinds of voices. So we're seeing lots of family voices come to the fore, families who've had their young, their children in the system and who can speak directly to the harms that that system has brought on their children and know best in some ways what's the best way to move forward in terms of reforming the system. And we're seeing new organizations develop, existing organizations get stronger, and I think a deeper and a greater opportunity for awareness across the public around what we need to do to change the system and improve it. That being said, there's a lot to do, and I hope for sea change. But in the meantime, we'll just keep chiseling away.
Well, I have to say, you did touch on one thing there that I would like to expand on briefly, and it was one of the things that came up when I first started working with Humane Exposures, is the fact that what appeals to me is not only the vital nature of this issue, but the fact that it is very much not a matter of party or ideology, and its ground, particularly in a contentious political climate like we have now, for people to actually reach out and remember, both sides can work together. It's happened in the past, and great things have been done. This is a great thing that America needs to do. The sides have to come together, and all the data is there showing all the arguments needed on both the left and the right as to why it's a must-do. So anyway, back to you guys. So we've got this wonderful report, this fistful of data, if you'll pardon the spaghetti western analogy. This is quite a document. What would you recommend to people out there that want to find a way to make use of this data, people that want to affect some sort of practical change on the local, the state, or if they're ambitious, and I hope there are a few out there, on the national level? So how would you advise this tool being used by advocates, legislators, public defenders, and such. Why don't we start with Abby for this one? Oh, I think we lost your
Abby,
audio.
you're muted.
Am I back?
Yes,
You're back.
there we go.
Okay. I think that one of the ways that it can be used is, I mean, I'll take an example from my own life. I was at our state capitol last week, and I ran into one of the reporters that we have a relationship with, and she said, "Hey, I got that thing from that national group you're in, and there was a lot of good stuff in that. You know, I'm interested to talk to you about that." And so it opened the window and opened that form of communication so that I can send her things and say, "Hey, Jacqueline, you know, I wanted to make sure you saw this piece, how Connecticut was highlighted in this way." And one of the things that we've done is really use that. You know, you talked about a sea change and momentum. And while we know we have a long way to go, we have found that with our partners in the state legislature, at state agencies, that positive reinforcement really works. So we like to send them elements of, look how your amazing work was highlighted in this national publication, and then show them how they can move further forward. But I also this morning sent an email to our child advocate for the state of Connecticut, who I know is interested in looking at the issue of shackling and when restraints are used in both in schools and in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
And there were 2 or 3 things that happened in 2009 to 2011 that were highlighted in advances. So I was able to send her the links and the information and say, "Hey, check out, you know, this bill from New Hampshire to see if it might be something we can replicate here." Because we have found that you know, it's different. Some legislators love to be innovative and you know, sort of early adopters, to use tech phrase. And in Connecticut, we don't. We're the land of steady habits. So if we can give somebody, "Hey, look what these 3 other states did. You don't have to, you know, break a mold here. You can follow along with something that's already been established," they love that. So being able to look at actual things that have happened other places where you can read their legislation, you can see exactly what has happened and how it got there, and then have the ability to reach out to those people and say, "Hey, I read this information in advances and I saw your contact information, I want to learn more about it." So I think there's there's so many different ways they can be used, but those are just 2 that happened to me in the last week.
Outstanding. Well, real-world examples are always terrific. Jim, same question. Why don't you elaborate where she left off?
Well, I think in addition, it's something that is just within our own advocacy community, as Abby talked about, sort of our external customers, but also as well within our own group, to see what's happening in other states, is both reinforcing and educating ourselves to see, you know, different ideas and different twists. And as Abby alluded, you know, we don't take sort of a one-size-fits-all approach, but it's really helpful to see what you know, what was done in Connecticut or what was done in North Carolina or other places, and sometimes really just look at something and say, you know, that was really you know, that's something we hadn't thought of here, but it would be really good if we took a look at something and use that as a nudge to work on an issue.
Indeed. And Abby, anything to add?
Well, it's funny because
I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm sorry.
I think Abby wanted to add something.
No,
my apologies.
It is a possibility.
We're on a boil water thing here in New Orleans right now, so I didn't get coffee this morning. Please excuse me.
Oh, no.
So anyway, please, Abby, you were starting to say something.
No, I was deferring to Sarah. I yield the floor.
Indeed, Sarah.
I mean, I think that one of the things about this document is that you know, it's pretty amazing to look at it and think about all of these reforms that have happened across the state, and it feels like there's this tremendous momentum forward, and there is. And at the same time, when you think about how many different pieces of legislation and how many different administrative reforms there was, it really speaks to the depth of the problems that we have. And so it's both a sort of rallying cry forward as look how far we've come, as well as, oh my God, how far we have yet to go, as demonstrated by how many, many changes we've made. And the other piece that I think it's important to highlight is each of these changes I'd like to think of, you look at these pieces of legislation, these administrative reforms, and you think, each of these represents some number of children whose lives are improved, right? But how did we get there? Each of these things there was so much effort to make each of these pieces of legislation, right? So it required legislative champions. It required folks to vote for that legislation. It required advocates and funders and the broader public. So it's, in some ways, you know, we joke about this report weighing about ½ a pound, and it really should weigh about a ton. When you think about all the work that went into each of these legislative changes. And so I think for me, that's the other way to think about this, is when you're using it to talk to folks. It's about the power of people coming together to do positive things, and you can see it in black and white, or blue and white, I guess, in terms of this document, of what that outcome can be.
And I think, just to follow up on that briefly, if I can, it's
please.
When you look at through the document, and I was going through it again this morning, and you look at how far we've come, but you take a look at the pieces, and I think of so many of these administrative changes and legislative changes are really they're one chisel at the sculpture. We don't have a full sculpture, but this is yet another piece of the rock that's come off. Yeah, but when you look at what's happened, I mean, there were 3 different jurisdictions in 2011 that passed laws that said you can't shackle or restrain a girl in the juvenile justice system when she's giving birth. Mm-hmm. I mean, are you kidding me? You know, what year is this? So great that we passed that, but how sad that in this time, you know, today, we had to, and another one, that you can't put belly chains around a woman or a girl in their 3rd trimester. It's fantastic that it happened. It's sad that it needed to happen, and it points out sort of how much further we do have to go. So it's, you know, the chipping away at the sculpture is happening, but we certainly don't have, you know, David. We're not there.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to put Ben on the spot, but I think as our communications person, I'm sure his brain is going 100 miles an hour too of other sort of ideas on how not only this piece but the other things we do can be used.
Yeah, you've gotten off easy so far, Mr. Chambers. Why don't you dive in here?
Well, frankly, the team has been doing really well. I'm very proud of them.
We're well trained.
No, I mean, I think the thing that's most impressive to me about advances as a document is how, I think the thing that people don't understand generally about the juvenile justice system is how balkanized it is. So it's really mostly run at the state level, not at the federal level. There's some federal guidance, and actually the federal funding for that is currently under threat. But most of that's set at the state level. So every state has to make its own policy, and that means that the policy challenges are often different, or the political situation around making policy change can be very different. And I think it's easy when you're in this work to kind of get sucked into what's happening locally and to be thinking about what's happening locally, and this document really makes it clear that there is, in fact, I mean, you used the phrase sea change. I would say that this document actually kind of represents a sea change. I mean, it's not the, we, as Abby said, we don't have, to use the other metaphor, we don't have David yet. We have so far to go, but it's really clear how many people have been working on this, how much progress has been made, and it's spotty. It's not, it's different progress at different degrees of progress at different places. But that, I think, alone is something that is worth communicating to people, general public, to journalists, to policymakers, to see that they're not alone in making changes or stepping out. They're not ahead of the curve. They're not too far ahead of the curve. That there's so much else going on. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that's really actually, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think this is an incredible resource for people who want to make change. So, for example, you could look at this document, you could say, okay, there's a lot of entries in here for disproportionate minority, confinement, basically racial and ethnic disparities issues, but a lot of it is studying the issue. This is the bugaboo. This is sort of the fundamental problem we have in the system: is how do you actually move the dial so that we are not unfairly, prosecuting, jailing, detaining, punishing, pulling kids of color into the system. So I would think that that's one thing you could look at, is you could look at that section and say, okay, there's actually something we could probably do to move that dial. On the other hand, you also might look at I don't know. You might look at the thing that's jumping out of my head right now is mental health treatment, for example. You may say there's not as many entries in that section. What could we do in our state that could actually advance that? How can we help the kids in our system get better treatment, make sure that they're not pulled into the justice system to get that treatment, and if they are, that they're not unfairly kicked off of, say, Medicaid or something like that while they're detained, so that when they come out, they don't have coverage. I mean, those are the kinds of things that you could look at this document and see. So
I would venture to put forth as well that one thing, bloggers, my fellow bloggers out there, should definitely take a look at this, because the point where most bloggers stumble is they don't back up what they're doing with facts and research and other stuff. Right here, you're handing out a massive amount of verified information. As far as bloggers and journalists go, everybody out there lives in a state that's got problems. I mean, trust me, I live in Louisiana. We've got a higher incarceration rate than Iraq, which was true and was proven a few weeks ago. This is ammunition. This is something for those of you out there on the internet who have your blogs and your pulpits, and those of you trying to break into journalism. This is a way to find a story. Just like Ben was saying, you can look at this, and this, and say, well, racial disparity here, racial disparity here. There's quite a number of ways I'm sure you can find linked data across a number of areas and a number of subjects. So I'm simply going to make that comment for my fellow bloggers in the audience. Resources are always a good thing.
Well, and there's also,
go ahead.
Loki, that's a fantastic point, and if folks want to back up, they see something and they want even more information, the information for who the NJJN contact would be is in that document as well, or on the njjn.org website. So if you want more data, you want more information, I know in Connecticut that's what the role we play is, sort of that depository of where all the data and information is, or the people who are pointing it to you. So I should get a special stipend for all the state universities for the number of college students that are always asking for information for their theses. And we're happy to do it, because the more people who have the information, the better it is. But it's absolutely a great resource for bloggers that way.
Well, curation of archives is incredibly important,
right.
And not just here, in many other ways. Jim, you had a question, sir? I
think it was Ben that was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I guess I was just going to say that one other thing that, just piggybacking on what Abby was saying, was that on the online edition, if you go to our website and go to the document, we have actually the document itself, which I will hold up here, is organized by policy area. There's like 24, I think, different kind of policy areas that it's organized into. But if you wanted to, say, look at what was going on in your state specifically across policy areas, you go to our website. You could see, let's say I live in Oregon, so I could go and look at Oregon, and I could see all the things that have been done in those 3 years across all those policy areas. And if, say, legislation passed, or if there was a document that was associated with a policy change, then I could actually download that stuff directly from the website, which then, of course, provides a lot. It could provide a model if I wanted to do legislation somewhere else. I can send that to somebody. I can study it. I can talk to an NJJN member and another advocate involved with it to see, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about the end result, what they would like to have seen happen as I'm crafting my own legislation or my own policy. I think it's incredibly powerful.
Outstanding. So, out of curiosity, now that you guys have the document out, are you sending it off to politicians in the areas covered, or sending it out to groups, or are you basically just trying to get a lot of eyes on the website and get them to download it there?
Well, we've had a number of, all of our member organizations have received some number of these, a packet of these, and a number of them have requested a huge package so they could give one to every member of their state legislature. And so we're happy and honored and pleased to be able to provide copies, and we want the more that folks can get the hard copy in their hands, the better. And again, for you, to go and be able to go on the website and actually pull down the legislation is another huge benefit for any legislator or any legislative staff who's thinking about moving forward a particular kind of change in that state. So yeah, definitely on the web, we want everyone to look at it. Go to njjn.org. But if you want a hard copy, shoot us an email and let us know. We want to get it out there.
What's the email address that people would contact?
info@njjn.org.
Outstanding. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Before I let you return to your busy work days, though, I am going to go around the table. I would like to close out with the same question for each of you in turn. In your time working with the NJJN, what have you found to be the moment that really just sort of struck you the most deep down on a personal level in working with these issues and these bits of data? Abby, why don't you start off?
That might be the hardest question anybody's ever asked, because
I try to be a good interviewer.
Yeah, no, because there's just so many, and it sounds like a cliche, but I do policy work. I'm a policy wonk. I work with the people who are at 20,000 feet. But every time I hear from a formerly incarcerated youth or a parent who comes up to me and just says, thank you, because what you do really does make a difference. When you do this work at 20,000 feet, you don't always get to see that. So I have recognized the fact through people who have been kind enough to come up and let me know that change actually really happens, and it does make a difference.
Ben?
I agree. It's a tough question to answer. Partly, when I think about why I almost go back to the question of why I do the work, and that really takes me back to those moments when you have personal contact with somebody who has been affected by the work that you're doing or by the system. And the thing that I always think of is there was a 12-year-old boy that I was mentoring a few years ago, and we were downtown, and he was hungry. It was lunchtime, and I said, "Do you want to go to the food court?" And he got all quiet and freaked out, and I finally, we talked, and I kind of talked him down sort of from where he was, and finally figured out that he did not know the phrase food court. This is how limited his expression was. How limited his environment was. And court sounded like court to him. And wow. This is not a kid who was directly involved in the system. He was kind of headed there. But that, I think, epitomizes what the kids that I have talked to who are in the system. There's an incredible need for attention, and there's also often an incredibly limited sort of background for experience. So they don't actually even know sometimes kind of what options they have in their lives, and often they're limited by their financial circumstances. So this is a long answer, but that's part of it. When I think about the kids that I've met in the system, almost all of them are just heartbreaking in their need for attention and guidance and so forth. And I think we see that played out at the policy level. So the thing that impressed me, one of the things that impressed me this last year, in addition to say raising the age in Connecticut, was in Colorado. They finally managed to overturn sort of, I think it was a law basically that sort of gave prosecutors the total discretion about who they would charge into adult court and therefore into the adult system. And since we know that that's for kids, the adult system is they get fewer services. They're less likely to come out of it. They're more likely to commit crimes when they come out of it.
The recidivism rate skyrockets in those scenarios. Yeah. That's been proven.
So when they were able to kind of turn that around, that I think that epitomizes. There's so many examples of all the across the country, but that's one thing that jumps out at me. So.
Well, don't worry about it being a long answer. You must remember our books on the subject at Humane Exposures are all personal narratives.
That's right.
Photos taken there. So that's. Thank you for sharing that one. Jim, why don't you go next, sir?
Yeah, let me go with. I think and it's hard to sort of for a moment or whatever, but I think the idea for me, kind of going a different way, has been after spending 30 some years sort of working in the system, and I think always trying to be an advocate for kids and in the community in a professional capacity working within the system, was really the opportunity to meet a number of people in the network already, and I'll just mention a couple that, and not because they're on the call, but both Abby and Sarah, who the opportunity to spend any time with them, and it's true of so many of our members. There's sort of a depth of dedication and real true commitment to what we're trying to do, that it's a very powerful thing to feel and experience, and it's that opportunity to interact with those folks that oftentimes I look and go, boy, I wish I could live up to those expectations or whatever. But it's really the other members of NJJN, and Sarah and Abby are great examples, and there are others as well. But the deep commitment that you see when you and feel when you talk to people in our network is very, very powerful.
Outstanding. And saving the best for last, Sarah?
Well, all right. I think I'm not sure. I'm so engaged in what everyone's saying. I can't really recall the question, but one thing that I want to mention.
I was fishing for an anecdote about the instance in your involvement with the NJJN, particularly if it involved a particular person that really just kind of hit home to you on a personal level, sort of strike to the heart type of moment. But please, if you have other stuff, go on with that as well.
I can't answer your question, but I do want to say just two parts to that. One is that over the 7 years that I've been here at the National Juvenile Justice Network, one of the things that's given me most hope and has been so heartening is seeing the foundation community step up and partner with advocates and partner with system administrators who want to make changes and do right by kids. And so we see the MacArthur Foundation, who's putting in tens of millions of dollars to improve outcomes for youth, and who actually helped fund this particular publication. You see numerous other foundations, Public Welfare Foundation, Tao Foundation, Open Society Foundations, Casey Foundation, all stepping forward and saying we have to do better by our kids. The piece that speaks to me, and I think that one of the things that we're seeing in the last few years, this sort of fiscal imperative to reorient and rethink our approach to how we hold young people accountable. And one of the things that's led to is what we're calling a sort of a right-sizing of the juvenile justice system. So you're seeing a lot of these large, big youth facilities, whether you call them commitment facilities or training schools or prisons, but a lot of them are being shut down because everyone's recognizing that they're too expensive and the outcomes aren't good for young people and for public safety. And the piece that sort of gets me all the time is when you walk into a facility and you see kids who are 10, 11, 12, and they're in cells, and they're away from their families, they're away from supports, and literally cells and the bars and the gates closed behind them, and you think, what are we doing? What are we doing when we have these young kids, 13, 14, and locking them in prison cells? And how can this be the way our society thinks is the right way to hold young people accountable? And I think that when we can expose what's actually happening when we put kids in facilities, and we actually we can see it with our own eyes, and we can touch it, and it reorients how you approach the work. And I think every time I walk into a facility with young people, I have to say I think I'm recommitted to making sure that we're doing right by kids and keeping them in community-based settings whenever we possibly can, and supporting them and their families and their communities. So,
well said indeed. Well, thank all of you for taking the time to join us online today. Before we hop off, I would like Ben, since he is the communications guy, to take a moment and share with you where their online resources are. That way you can find the website, you can find the report, and you can find other groups to get involved with if making some waves on this particular subject is what you want to do. Ben, take it away.
Ben, you're
I think you muted yourself, Ben, although I do like the
muted.
paper. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what you get with live internet.
He's still
You're
muted,
still muted.
but
You
do
can
want to
put
go
a
to
piece of paper, though. We'll read it for
NJJN.org.
you.
You saw the paper.
Either that or we could end with a 10-minute elaborate pantomime.
There we go.
Go to NJJN.org.
.org. Excellent. Excellent.
And you will find you will find the full publication, and you'll be able to go by search by state or search by issue area, and you can pull up from 2009 to 2011, and actually going back when we first started loading it up in 2006, every single piece of positive piece of legislation, administrative reform, you can get the actual language, and it's sortable, it's searchable. Go, please use it, please visit it.
Excellent.
And you can find other policy platforms and other work that we've done that I think people can use.
Excellent. And you guys are also on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, we are.
Outstanding.
Please be our friend.
So, now, would people look for National Juvenile Justice Network or just NJJN on Facebook?
Benjamin, I think National Juvenile Justice Network.
Yep.
He's nodding,
Yeah.
so yes, that's it. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, both those of you watching us live and those of you watching the YouTube archive after the fact, thank you very much for tuning in and for having an interest in these important aspects of the lost and forgotten people in our society. I'd like to thank everyone from the NJJN for taking time to join us today, and you can follow our own coverage of these issues both online and in our books at humaneexposures.com. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely day. Now, all of you wave goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Put my hand down where I can see it. Okay, great. Thanks.
There you go. Have a great day, folks.